Okay, so the Bank of America, a couple of whistleblowers have just come forward and filed a lawsuit against the Bank of America for a series of practices that they allege were being done. William Wilson says that the bank conducted what was called a blitz twice a month, every 2 weeks. Case managers were instructed to deny any applications for the Home Affordable Modification Program, the HAMP program. This is where you basically can refi and it's backed by the government. Why? Well, those HAMP, refis are not as profitable as the old let's just take your home stuff. There were $500 bonuses for filling foreclosure quotas, according to Simone Gordon, another employee who placed 10 or more accounts into foreclosure. Any employee who placed 10 or more accounts into foreclosure in a given month received a $500 bonus. For fewer than 10, they gave things like gift cards to retail stores like Target or Bed Bath & Beyond as rewards. And they lied to clients about documentation. Gordon's affidavit said it was the bank's policy to sit on financial documents borrowers submitted for 30 days, then label them stale and require the homeowner to reapply. Bert Sheeks, the contract employee, was instructed to find any pretext to justify closing loan modification applications, even in cases where we knew the borrower had, in fact, responded with complete documents. Erica Brown, another whistleblower, was instructed to inform, this is a quote from the lawsuit, was instructed to inform every homeowner who called in that their file was under review, even when she could see no one had looked at the documents in question. She personally says she saw more than 100 incidents in which the banks canceled a loan modification due to non-payment when the file showed that all the payments had been received on time. So, we've got some bad actors in this country. Brian Tracy is on the line with us. He's an author, businessman, success expert, CEO of Brian Tracy International, the website briantracy.com. And Brian, I understand that you think we should not be regulating these banksters and other corporations in America quite as much as we are. How can you say that when you hear this kind of stuff?
Well, you have the law of perverse consequences. Every time they pass a law for political purposes, they create a problem, which requires passing another law, which creates another problem. For example, this whole idea of this home investment where banks were forced to lend money to non-credit-worthy borrowers.
That's actually been totally debunked.
Pardon?
The argument that you're putting forward is the old Alex Jones argument that during the Clinton administration, or during the Carter administration rather, a law was passed that forced banks to loan money to people who were not creditworthy. And It's simply not true. It's been debunked. I mean, it continues to live on in the Alex Jones and Glenn Beck sphere. But the law that you're talking about was a law that outlawed redlining. What it said was that a bank could no longer say, we will not loan to you if you live in this particular zip code, which is what banks used to do. Now, under the law that was passed during the Carter administration, the banks had to look at the individual homeowner's creditworthiness and make the decisions on a case-by-case basis rather than doing it based on zip codes or on city blocks.
Yeah, but
that
wasn't what caused the subprime meltdown.
No. That's it. It was the deregulation done by Phil Graham. No. It was the deregulation of the banks that led to the subprime meltdown. Prior to 1999, it was illegal for banks to loan money to people when they were heavily regulated. They couldn't loan money to people who couldn't afford to pay it back. When those regulations were removed as a result of Graham Leach Bliley in 1999, Phil Graham pushing this thing through because his wife Wendy was on the board of Enron, and Enron wanted seriously big time to get into the banking business, and this blew up the Glass-Steagall Act that ever since 1935 had protected our system. When that was passed, then it became legal for banks to loan anything to anybody, and they did. And liar loans came along. They were not invented by the government. They were authorized by the government by virtue of the regulation going away.
You're right. They were authorized by the government, and the banks are so heavily regulated. They're not allowed to make bad loans. And when the government insisted they make the bad loans,
the government never insisted they make bad loans.
Thoroughly, the government insisted they make bad loans.
Brian, they didn't.
We can't do it. They said, "All right, we'll buy the loans from you." And so banks, instead of lending money and making the vigorous, the arbitrage, started to make loans of any kind, but the government guaranteed to buy them all back. That's why the FHA and FDA and so on are bankrupt. This is why the whole economy collapsed.
But it's because of deregulation, not because of regulation.
A government-created problem.
But it's because of deregulation, not regulation.
No,
It was
the banks are the most heavily regulated organizations in the history of the world.
Well, it was the deregulation of the banks that allowed them to loan money to uncredit-worthy people. It wasn't a regulation that required them to. It was deregulation that let them.
If you don't make these loans, we're going to hurt you very badly.
You cannot.
If you do make them, we will buy them from you. So you just make the profits.
I'll tell you what, Brian.
Okay. And not only that,
I'll tell you what, Brian. If you can come back on this program with one example of one bank, even one, in the entire history of the 21st century, one bank that was punished because they said this person is not creditworthy. And the government came in and said, okay, we're going to threaten you. And the person actually wasn't creditworthy. Come back on this program and I will publicly apologize to you. In fact, I'm on TV. I will bow down to you. But I'm telling you, you've been listening to Glenn Beck or somebody like that. It is not true.
I've just read about 300 or 400, not only newspaper accounts, but books, articles, put out by
Name one.
Private sector foundations.
Give me one example.
The Heritage Foundation, the Wall Street Journal.
That doesn't make it true. They all talk in generalities. When you say, give me one example of one bank that got backed down by the government because they didn't want to loan money to somebody because that person was unemployed, you can't find it.
Okay, well, that's I really.
If there was such an example, Brian, that person would be as famous as Reagan's welfare queen. We would all know that person's name.
Banks are the most conservative lenders in the history of the world. They simply don't throw money at subprime lenders. They were forced to do it by the government.
No.
Other than that, they would be punished, and so they did.
No,
in order to get them to do it, agreed to buy the mortgages back.
Brian, again, they did it because they could offload the people who were originating those mortgages. First of all, in most cases, weren't even banks. They were mortgage origination companies like Countrywide. And they could offload that mortgage within minutes. I mean, in many cases, these mortgages were held for minutes, and then they skim their fee off the top, and then they offload it to some other bank, and then that bank offloads it to another bank, and eventually it gets to a bank that turns it into a derivative. They bundle thousands of them together, and they turn it in. They turn millions and millions of dollars worth of mortgages into billions of dollars worth of derivatives.
But you know what reserve banking did when Lehman Brothers collapsed? They were lending 42-1.
Right.
And the bottom of their pyramid was government guaranteed subprime mortgage loans.
And you realize that when they were regulated before Graham Leach Bliley, they couldn't loan more than 13-1
until the pyramid fell down.
But
and it was because the government stopped
regulating
these subprime loans.
It was because the government stopped regulating them. The government we used to, the banking authorities used to enforce a 13-1 maximum ratio. And when Alan Greenspan actually lobbied to pull that thing back, and they did. They pulled it back.
Well,
Bill Seidman, the guy
why don't we just put this aside for now?
Give me another example then of bad regulations.
You were asking me about my feeling about government regulations interfering with entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
I think we have been, but we've only got a minute left. But
all right. Well,
give me your best.
The bottom line is that the most entrepreneurial countries create the greatest number of jobs and wealth and opportunities for the most people. And the ones who are the least entrepreneurial are the ones that have the highest taxes and the most regulations, and they go in the opposite direction. And we're going in the opposite direction.
I don't know. Somalia has pretty low taxes and very low regulations. But Sweden, with a lot of taxes and a lot of regulations, seems to be doing better than Somalia.
Yes, but if you look at the Swedish tax system, which I've examined very carefully, they leave virtually all private property in private hands. So there's enormous incentives. Also, they allow an enormous amount of deductions that are not allowed in the U.S. Tax laws in the U.S. are actually more onerous for corporations than in Sweden.
Okay. Brian Tracy, you got the last word there, Brian. BrianTracy.com. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. Should we deregulate everybody? I don't think so, but Rand Paul does.